Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to talk about an interesting topic, which is sports psychology. And we have a sports psychologist with us here who will give you a great overview of how things work. To begin with, let me tell you that this program is being organized by Health-O-Mind. Health-O-Mind is a mental wellness startup based in Bangalore. Health-O-Mind's efforts are directed towards creating awareness about mental health and well-being in men, women, and children across the nation. Health-O-Mind aspires to build an ecosystem that will enable people to tackle their mental health problems while fighting the stigma around it. Health-O-Mind strives to be a one-stop solution for all mental wellness-related concerns and are keen to collaborate with purpose-driven individuals and organizations who share this vision to effectuate a mentally healthy India. Health-O-Mind looks at mental wellness from a holistic perspective, and that's what differentiates them from other organizations. And to talk about sports psychology, we have with us Shivjot Gill. Shivjot Gill is a sports psychologist and a mental trainer. She completed her PhD with expertise in the field of sports and positive psychology. She holds a bachelor's with majors in psychology from Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar, and a master's of science with expertise in counseling psychology from Punjabi University, Patiala. Her current research work involves interdisciplinary engagement, which focuses on exploring the impact of mental training methods on well-being and other health components of Indian athletes. In addition to academics, she has contributed to the field of sports for 11 years as an athlete and has competed at national and international level in shooting sport. Presently, she is working as a sports psychologist with athletes of both national and international level and in providing them with psychological guidance to plan their training schedules along with consistent application of mental preparation strategies. In the past, Shivjot has worked with various organizations as a sports psychologist, such as the Punjab Armed Police, Jalandhar Arms Cadet Corps of Punjab, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, and Chandigarh, and archery team Punjabi University, Patiala. In addition to her field work experience, she has also contributed to the field of academia and has presented her work at various international conferences, both in India and abroad, as a facilitator of workshops on topics related to health and well-being. Shivjot has also gained her experience in the field of guidance and counseling for almost 3 years as an academic counselor and is currently pursuing it as an adapted practice in the context of athletes' career building and guidance. That's an exhaustive CV, Shivjot. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Apekshita. That was a wonderful introduction. and
All
elaborate.
thanks to you. Thank you for agreeing to be with us. So I just thought we can begin by you telling us about your journey, about what was that moment that really triggered you and that really impressed upon you the importance of mental resilience when it comes to sports.
So this all began in the year of 2015. Actually, it was my second year in shooting sport. And I was told that we have our World University Games trials coming up. So just like any other athlete, I was really excited for it and I really wanted to make it to the World University Championship. So that time, after preparing for all for my sport and after doing the regular training and all, one day we had our trials and it was told to us that the trials will be actually the selection criteria for the World University Games. So during the trials, when the competition started for me, during the second round, basically, the stock of the gun broke. So in the middle of the competition, the weapon that I was using, it actually broke. Well, I was told to take a break and fix it up. So emotionally, what triggered me that time was not that my weapon broke and what will I do, but when I was looking at my surroundings and the people around, I actually had no one to come up to me and say we can help it out and let's look into it, let's get it all together. So that was a very striking moment for me because I really wanted that, at least at the emotional level, somebody comes up and says, hello, we can fix it up. So I did it all by myself, and eventually I requested the referee that I want to play, but I couldn't qualify for that competition. So the biggest learning I had from it was that number one, that it's not only about your training, it's not only about your mental preparation, but it also about your sporting environment and how you're competing when you suddenly feel that you are all alone and by yourself. So this was one of the moments that actually shook me that time. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it really sort of propelled you on a journey to help others how they can better train themselves when they are in situations like this. So tell us about that. What kind of methods did you use to become mentally resilient yourself and then transition to being a professional who could help others?
Right. So that time I took a break. Actually, after that particular competition, I took a long break, like 3, 4 months, and I got back home and I spoke to my parents. And that was a point when I started introspecting and thinking more about what should I do? How do I prepare for the next? And what should be my best possible move about my career, about my sporting career. So the best that I could do that time, and I think I did right, was that I started reading more about my sport. That what are the basic requirements, how I should approach this sport as an athlete, and what is must to be done. So after realizing that there are a lot of factors that I as an athlete cannot cope up because of my my own conditions, my own commitments to my education, and of course the financial resources, I decided that it's better to switch on to a career which teaches me more about it and where I can guide others about it. So that's how my journey began, a shift from sports to an academia, and that's how I started exploring and learning more about sports psychology.
Sure, absolutely. So, for people who are watching us today, people who have absolutely no idea what sports psychology is, and athletes especially, who have a feeling that they could benefit, could you tell us in brief what is sports psychology? And for somebody who would like to benefit from this, how can they go about it? What should be their first step?
So, if I talk in the academic terms about sports psychology is one of a proficiency that one gains after attaining the higher education in psychology. Now, it basically involves one-to-one interaction with the athlete, or it can also be a distance training. The basic purpose here is that how a sports psychologist motivates an athlete. And if an athlete is facing any kind of hindrances in performing to their optimal potential, how does a sports psychologist get them back, and how does the sports psychologist make them more resilient about their sport? So it's basically a process. It is not like I wouldn't say it is like a tip or a trick or a technique, but it takes time. It goes with the flow. And all those who are new to this field, I would suggest that you should begin your own research journey. Please start reading about it. The more you read about it, the more you understand the current perspectives of it, specifically in your own country, it would be better to understand it from a different lens.
Mhm. And what kind of strategies would you suggest for somebody who is just starting out? So, say they have been reading about their sport, they're trying to understand what works and what doesn't, but how would you encourage them to really take their mental health seriously and to develop that kind of resilience to, perform better at their sport?
Mhm. So it all depends upon how do you begin. So anybody who has just started or who's going to start or who wants to make a change, the very first thing that I suggest to all the young athletes out there and all the students who want to even study about sports psychology is that there is a need to develop resource allocation and resource analysis approach. What kind of the internal and what kind of the external resources are available to you? You need to first make an analysis of that and understand that what can you do to make your situation or make your conditions better in order to perform good. So when I say perform good, means that in best of your capabilities, and not trying to pressurize your own self just because you don't have enough resources, or you don't have enough time, or you are completely dedicated to your education and you can't transit to sports. So it completely depends upon the individual who is pursuing this career. Resource allocation, resource adjustment is very important, both the internal and the external resources. So that's my very first suggestion, and that's the most important suggestion, because a lot depend upon how do you strategize things for your own self. What kind of a coach you want to approach, where do you want to train, for how long you want to train, what is your goal, and how do you want to approach to it. Eventually that is completely up to an athlete, because an athlete has to go on the field and perform at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Shivjot, before we move on to specific scenarios where a sports psychologist can help, because you mentioned the topic of resources, I do want to ask you how affordable and accessible is sports psychology. So you did say that it's about what kind of resources are available to you, how you want to make use of it. But can we imagine a scenario where somebody has absolutely no access to a sports psychologist, and what can they do then?
This is a very relevant question, and the very first thing to go on about is we are living in a digital world. We have access to all the internet resources. The best way to go on about is that start reading the resource material, specifically the scientific resource material that is related to sports psychology. So you can open up ResearchGate, you can open up Google Scholar, different kind of platform to read about it. So this is going to give you a factual information and authentic information. That's the first way. Read and learn more about it. The other way is to watch the interviews, or talk to people who are already related to the field of sport. Because certainly, even if you're not a sports psychologist, you're a physiotherapist or a doctor or some other athlete, you in a process gain a lot of experience about different things that are available to you, so people can actually guide you about it. The third way is pursuing it professionally. So now in India, we have a lot of masters courses coming up with a specialization in sports psychology. To be specific, we can also look into the NIS courses or Sports Authority of India courses. And of course, we have uh, personalized courses. There are a lot of platforms that are giving knowledge, they are sharing knowledge about what sports psychology is. There are short-term courses, long-term courses. So according to the content that is there, and according to the facilitator and the suitability, anybody can enroll for that and attend those courses to learn more, because it's eventually start from knowledge gaining.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. So, I just wanted to understand more about sports psychology. So, if you could tell us a bit about how can somebody, as an athlete, somebody who perhaps is dealing with anxiety issues, how can they make best use of the resources they have, and how can they perform better, especially in the case of anxiety and stress, which is very common nowadays?
Uh, One resource that I would like to mention here, which is not much talked about, and this is important to be mentioned here. By the International Olympic Committee, which is IOC, we have a lot of guidelines and the resources, the mental health resources available online,
Mhm.
right? The only thing is that because they're online, they are not circulated in the hard copy format around us. We are not looking at that. So the best way is that people who are facing such issues, who are facing these kind of problem, and if they are shy and they don't want to come out with they don't want to speak up to anybody, the one way is you make it your own journey to explore. But if you are open to speak and share, because it depends again from one individual to the other, the best way is to approach to the people who understand you best in your sporting fraternity. It can be a coach, it can be a friend, to reach out to them and to tell them that what kind of the problems you are facing. And if not that, If you can't do that, then I would suggest that reach out to the sporting centers. So there are a lot of government sporting centers. There are the facilities are nowadays also being provided by the district sports office. Students need to get to they need to get aware about all these things. So it's completely the matter of awareness. So there are resources available, and if you check on the internet and if you talk to your sporting fraternity also, they can also suggest you a lot of sports psychologists. So a lot of people take online sessions also these days because due to the distance and all. But if you can approach somebody, that would be the best way to go on about it. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. This makes a lot of sense. So sports, as you have also mentioned, is of course there's constant failure, there's success, but there's also failure. So, I would imagine that a lot of athletes are also facing disillusionment and demotivation, where they're just not driven enough to give their best. So, what do you
Yes.
suggest in that scenario?
Uh, we have been talking about a lot about the mental health and these issues, right? And athletes are not any different people. They also go through the same because of the kind of a scenario they perform in. It's so pressurizing at the end of the day. Uh, I would say that socially, just like we say that mental health has become a stigma, there is also a stigma around athletes, the sporting fraternity, and which is that athletes are performance machines, they perform and they have to be always the best. But we forget that they are humans first, and it is very natural that emotional problems, socio-emotional problems will occur in their behavior, no matter how strongly resilient they are. So now becoming resilient doesn't mean that you shut your emotional system. It means that you understand it and then you try to overcome it with the best of your capacity. Now there are different ways to go on about it, and I say it depends upon how a sports psychologist as a practitioner and an athlete come together and work on it. So it's a very personalized journey. Uh, so that's what is important, that it is very important to focus on these like we term it depression or anxiety. It can be something else also, could be a minor issue also, which is coming up in a different form. So we can't exactly say that. So it, like I said, it completely depends upon going on with the prospective need analysis, first understanding what is required, and maybe it turns out something different.
Hmm. Absolutely. So you mentioned personalized care. You mentioned how for each person the journey is going to be very different from the other. So
Right.
how do you go about deciding what kind of care is needed? Will somebody be more comfortable, say, journaling their emotions? Somebody is more comfortable talking about it. So how do you explore those opportunities and options that people might be most comfortable with? And how do you then advise that this is something that you should pursue?
So it's such a process that it's more like a therapeutic process in a way. When you engage, when you meet the athlete for the first time, and when you start in their journey with them, you get to understand their behavior patterns, you get to understand what they like, what they don't, and the kind of understanding they give about themselves through their gestures, through their performance, through their approach towards the sports psychologist actually explains a lot, that what is the basic requirement and how a sports psychologist has to go on about it. So basically that's the whole sole purpose of a sports psychologist, to get into the shoes of an athlete and understand the origin point of the problem. And over the time, when you work with an athlete, let's say it could be a 1 week or two weeks, you understand. And the initial phase of when you analyze them, when you conduct their need analysis, when you conduct their basic psychological testings, you get to understand a lot. As a sports psychologist, there is basically a you have the blue frame with you, that what the person is facing and what is the problem all about. Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. So I just have time for one more question. So we've discussed what sports psychologists do and how they manage to make sports persons feel better. Can you tell me something that athletes themselves need to do? How can they themselves become more resilient? How can they start on this journey?
So, for the young athletes, the one who are just starting their journey or they are planning to start their journey, I would always say be your own masters. So, when I say be your own masters, mean that decide for yourself why you want to do it and what do you exactly want to do and how do you imagine it, because imagination makes it all possible. How do you imagine it for yourself? And the best way is to write it. Please write it. Specifically, I suggest doing crisis journaling. Crisis journaling is basically whenever you're facing with any turmoil or any situation, just write it. Probably write it on a slip pad, wherever you get space, just write it down and tear it off. Write it. And any plan that you, maybe today you plan that okay, you want to continue it like a professional, or tomorrow you say no, this is not available to me, I don't think so, this is not going to work with me. This is generally what happens when you begin your journey in sport. So make a point that you write it so that you can always go back to it. uh, be your own masters in a way that you structure it for yourself first. The second way that you should go on about is please speak to people who are related to your sport. It can be a coach, it can be any senior athlete. Understand and learn from them what is the sport all about, what kind of a skill set it needs. Just not because you like the sport, you like watching it, you like, you feel it's thrilling, you take it. No, understand and analyze what kind of the technical physical skill it requires and what kind of both the internal and the external resources it requires. So when I say external, it can be economical resources, it can be in terms of your sporting kit, it it can be anything from the external, because external is something that affects us a lot, but
Mhm.
internal will automatically adjust according to it, because you will then know that you vouched for it and now you want to do it. So first is please note it down, write it for yourself, make a point that you write it in detail for yourself. The second is speak to people who are already in the field who can guide you about it. Yeah,
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Gir. I think these suggestions
you're
were
welcome, Diksha.
extremely beneficial for everything you've mentioned, from crisis journaling to talking to people to just the gathering the courage to approach sports federations and psychologists to just talk about how they feel. I think is super helpful, and I'm sure a lot of young athletes there will really benefit from this advice. So thanks a lot, and we hope to talk to you at some point in the future again.
Sure. Thank you so much.